Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. It is now time for the Louisville Regionals tier list video. Of course, Louisville is this weekend. It is going to be a massive regional. And of course, it's going to be an interesting one because we now have a decent look at what the meta is going to look like going into the tournament, thanks to Dortmund, Joinville, and some online tournament result data. So I'm definitely excited to rank each deck in the format, where I think they are in our current meta, where each deck stands, what I think is the best deck, and all that stuff I'm going to talk about in today's video. I'm going to have a lot more Louisville content out on the second channel this week too. And of course, if y'all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 18,000 subs, and I'll leave a link to the tier list I'm using in the description down below if you want to go try it for yourself. For the rankings, I'm going to keep it the same, S, A, B, C, D. I've been using this for my past few videos on tier lists, and I've been really liking this ranking a lot when ranking the meta. So, starting this off here, we do have a Charizard EX. Now, Charizard is definitely an interesting spot. It's actually, I think, got a lot worse post-Dortmund. I think going into Dortmund, a lot of people were hyping the deck up, myself included. I thought Charizard was a good deck going into Dortmund, you know, game Briar and Dusknoir. Like, this deck is broken. It's, like, so good. But I think now we can realize post-Dortmund, the deck is not as good as we all thought. I think Charizard is probably a B tier deck. I think the issue with Charizard is it's been, you know, interesting into this format where there's, you know, Regidrago, Dragapult, and of course Dusknoir. Aggressive bench destroyer decks are very popular right now. So I think Zard just kind of feels like the meta is a little too hostile for Charizard. Now you can tech out your Charizard list to beat some of these decks. Like you can play Mist Energy, Hero's Cape to like try to counter the hostile meta, but the issue with Charizard, I think, right now is the meta might be a little too aggressive towards it. It's still not a bad deck, and I still expect Charizard to be popular in Louisville just because it's Charizard, and people like to play Charizard because it's Charizard. So it'll probably still be popular at Louisville. I just don't think it's a very good deck for Louisville, in my opinion, though it will be popular still. I think Charizard is a B tier deck right now. It's still very strong, don't get me wrong, but it just feels like there's so many decks right now that are just like good at just either board wiping it before they get to play the game or just completely just destroying you, like with Dragapult and Kyurem and stuff. Speaking of Dragapult, I got Dragapult here in the A tier. It did win Dortmund, and I think Dragapult is going to hold its own going into this format. Now, there's two different ways to play Dragapult. The one that I think is going to be the more common way is going to be the Dortmund Regionals winning list, using the no Pidgeot draw engine, using the Tatsugiri, the Fez, and the Dracloaks. I think this is the best way to play Dragapult right now. I've played a bit of the deck myself, and yeah, I can agree that no Pidgeot actually feels fine. I mean, the deck flows a little bit more smoothly because you're not relying on setting up two stage 2s. You're still doing turn 2 Phantom Dive, which is really all that matters. Like, this is what makes Dragapult EX so good now, compared to like Regidrago, is you're doing turn 2 Phantom Dive very often with a bulky stage 2 Pokemon. Dragapult does, of course, have its like weaknesses, but I think overall it's a very solid deck now post Dortmund, and I think it's in the A tier status right now. I don't know how popular it's going to be. Like, if I were to predict, maybe it'll be like top 5 most played deck, but I think Dragapult is in a decent spot. Next up is Palkia Dusknoir. I think this is the best way to play Palkia right now. And this deck is also an A-tier deck. This deck is actually insane. Palkia is a really strong deck right now. It had really good results for the past few tournaments that it's been played at. And I think Palkia Dusknoir is just ridiculously powerful. It's got so much going for it. It's doing good in the online tournaments. Yeah, this deck is really, really strong. Like, Palkia Dusknoir is very good. I'm going to put an A tier. I don't know how popular it's going to be, though, because Palkia Dusknoir isn't really a deck that I feel like a lot of players are going to play, though it is very strong. But I think it'll be less popular than Dragapult and Charizard, but I think it'll still see play, and I think it's still pretty good for Dortmund, or for Louisville, sorry. It definitely is an A-tier deck, in my opinion. Regidrago is also next up. This is kind of weird. Drago is either A or B tier. It is also using Dragapult, which is really good, though Drago hasn't really been performing as well as Dragapult. I mean, it didn't win Dortmund. I think it did have like a top 16 placement at Dortmund. It still had a decent result. I think currently Drago feels like it's still like A tier. I think overall it's not going to be heavily played. I think Drago is less popular right now in the format, but I do think it's still a very strong deck. I think it's a very underrated deck right now. I think Drago is still probably A tier, to be honest with you. It is difficult to kind of base it, though, because it's like we're in a really big like go first meta right now, and I feel like Drago is a deck that always wants to go first. You never go second with Drago. I mean, if you have to, you have to, but Drago usually goes first, right? Because you can get that turn 2 Drago off and then start using Phantom Dive. So it's definitely interesting because like you kind of get smoked in like the matchups against like Palkia or Terapagos. So it does feel awkward to play Drago and go second. Since every deck wants to go first right now, it's more hostile towards it. So I don't know if A tier is really right for Regidrago. I mean, honestly, it might be B tier. The more I think about it, the more I think it's B tier. If anything, I think it is very high B tier, like very high B tier. So like it's probably bordering between A and B in all honesty. I don't know. Calling it A tier just doesn't feel right now. Though I think the deck is very strong. I think it is one of the most broken non-popular decks in the meta, if that makes any sense. Next up is Dragapult Pidgeot. B tier. I don't think it's the worst way to play Dragapult, obviously. It's not bad. It's still good, but I do think the better way to play Dragapult is just without Pidgeot. I think that is the stronger way to play it. I think the non-Pidgeot built Dragapult is just a better deck right now. So Pidgeot still would be B tier in my opinion. I think it's still a strong deck. Pidgeot is still a really good card. It's so much to set up, right? And, without it, the deck can flow a bit smoother, and I think that's just the better way to play it, especially within this meta that we are currently in. Next up is Gardevoir. Probably B tier also. Gardevoir is still like Gardevoir. It's still like a strong deck. My issue with Gardevoir right now, though, is that it's very weak to the aggressive meta. It's basically like Charizard. The deck, if it sets up and gets to play the game, the deck is really good. The problem is a lot of decks right now don't let Gardevoir set up and play the game. Also, Dusknoir's popularity in general is just really bad for Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir, it just has a bit of a target on its head. It truthfully could just be a C tier deck. Like, it's kind of crazy to call Guardy C tier, but it could actually be a C tier deck in all honesty. But Gardevoir, I think, is still a very powerful deck. I'm still going to put in B tier just because it is Gardevoir, but I think that it's a little too hostile for the deck right now. It feels like the meta is just too aggressive towards Gardevoir, and that's just not good. Next up is Goldengo. So this deck did get top 4 at Dortmund. I've been playing the deck a bit myself. I played it to a League Cup yesterday as I'm recording this, got top 4. Goldengo is actually really powerful. It's another deck that just kind of tries to go for the 2/2/2 prize trade, but it is also play Palkia, so you're kind of playing a Palkia V-Star deck with a good draw engine and a good attacking draw engine in that. So Dango's low-key a B-tier deck. Like, I don't even know if C-tier, I mean, I can't call it C-tier. Goldengo legit is good. Like, it's not a meme anymore. It is legit an actual, like, good deck. I think that the deck has a lot of things going for it. It's one of those decks, though, where it's kind of in that trap of go first and pop off on your second turn. Though Goldengo kind of takes a turn or two to really get going, because once you snowball Goldengo's on the board and Bibarel and stuff and Pokestop, the deck like flows really smoothly, but you have to get past the setup phase. That's why you have the Palkia in the deck, because Palkia is a really good early game attacker within Goldengo. I think it's a B tier deck. I think it's a strong deck. I don't think it's going to be popular, but I think Goldengo's pretty strong. I've been playing it a bit myself. I think it's in a good spot right now. It's the thing that makes Goldengo good is really just Palkia. Like, to be honest with you, without Palkia, this deck would probably be like C tier. Palkia Greninja does give this deck a lot of legs, but yeah, that alone gives it a lot of legs. Now, I don't think Goldengo is the best way to play Palkia, and that's why I have it down at B tier, because Goldengo is not the best Palkia deck right now. It is a deck that plays Palkia, but it's not the best Palkia deck. The best Palkia deck is Palkia Dusknoir, which I think Palkia Dusknoir, if it goes first, destroys Goldengo. If Goldengo goes first, it's a bit closer. Though I think Palkia Dusknoir can still win thanks to the fact that they have Dusknoir, which does give you a bit more of an advantage in the matchup. Next up is Ancient Box. Probably C tier. I mean, yeah, Ancient Box I feel like is a little bit weak right now. The aggressive meta doesn't really do it any favors. I feel like Dusknoir, I feel like is bad for Ancient Box. Dragapult is not a great matchup for Ancient Box. Charizard's never been a good matchup. Any deck with Briar is also really bad for the deck. I don't think it's a good time to play Ancient Box right now. I think it's better if Guardy was popular, but Guardy's not popular enough to warrant playing it. I think your Raging Bolt matchup immediately becomes a lot worse with Briar. Ancient Box truly feels like a C tier deck. I feel like this deck is an absolute pile right now and not worth playing, in my humble opinion. Dialga, there was one Dialga at day 2, I think in Dortmund, but, it's Dialga. It's not going to be popular, and I don't think Dialga, I don't know, it's the same thing as just playing, one of these Dusknoir go first decks. You know what I mean? If you're going to play a deck that goes first, just play a deck that puts on a lot of pressure on the board, like Palkia or Drago. I don't think you need to play Dialga. It just feels very mid right now, in my opinion. I don't know, D tier, for sure. It's not going to be popular either. Thorns. Thorns is definitely a weird anomaly. This deck actually feels really strong right now, and I think Thorns is a legit B-tier deck. We'll get into why it's a B-tier deck in just a moment, because I do think this deck gains a massive advantage with a deck that I assume is going to be very popular in Louisville. Also, Thorns is just a deck that kind of beats the cheese. It's pretty good against Goldengo. It's good into the Palkia decks. If you can take out the Greninja EX, or they prize Froakie, you just win. Yeah, like Thorns is really strong right now. It is legit an actual like good deck. It won like a late night. It's been doing really good in the online tournaments. Like you can play Enhanced Hammer to beat Terapagos. The deck is really, really strong. I legit think it's a B tier deck. It's sad to say, but yeah, Thorns does feel like a very powerful play heading into Louisville. I think it's better than Gardevoir and Goldengo overall. I think it's even better than Pidgeot. Thorns is like legit a good deck. It's crazy the deck is actually that good in this format right now. It's ridiculous. And one of the reasons why I think it's so good is because Lugia V-Star, which is an A tier deck. In fact, I think Lugia might be the best deck in the format right now. Now, I'm going to be honest, spoiler alert, I don't have a deck in S tier. I think when I was looking at this tier list and I was looking at all the decks, I'm like, is there an S tier deck right now? There's only 2 decks that I could say an S tier would be an S tier deck, though I don't think they're S tiers. I'm not going to put any deck in S tier, but there's 2 decks right now that I would put in the S tier status. Lugia is one of them, but I don't think there is an S tier deck in the format right now. Lugia, though, if I had to say, if somebody asked me what I thought was the best deck in the format right now, I would say it's Lugia. The overall best deck, I think, is Lugia right now. And yeah, I think Lugia is going to be extremely popular in Louisville. And I am talking it's going to be very popular. It's going to probably be the most played deck just because, one, it's Lugia. You don't really have to, like, learn anything crazy about the deck. It's not like you're playing Draga, Terapagos, or Palkia, Dusknoir, where you're just playing these, like, big combo decks with complicated turns. Where Lugia's just, like, it's Lugia, bro. Just Ultra Ball Weight to Archeops, turn 2, and you're probably winning each game if you're setting up. Like, yeah, Lugia's really good. It almost won Dortmund, and it did win Joinville. Lugia, I was going to say Lugiaville, which honestly it might be Lugiaville, is just a very strong play right now. Yeah, Lugia is probably the overall best deck. Yeah. I don't know if there is like a best deck right now, but if I were to say what the best deck is, it would probably be Lugia. Lugia is really good. I expect to see a lot of Lugia in Louisville. Very high chance Lugia ends up being arguably the most played deck. I think it's just, yeah, it's going to be potentially the most played deck. I'm going to be honest with you. Next up are the Lost Zone decks. So, I mean, I would put Turbo in C. I would put Lost Pull and Tina in D because I just don't think they're like real decks. Like, you know, maybe one person will make a day 2 with it. It happens like with Dialga. Like, that maybe is where D tier is right now, is like one of these decks might make day 2. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if more than one deck in C tier made day 2, but I would expect only one deck in day 2 in the D tier. So I would put like all the Lost Piles in there. Sablezard's cool, but I feel like the meta isn't right for it. Like, if I'm playing Lost Box, I just want to go fast, play yellow Pokemon that can take out, you know, Palkia and Lugia. Sablezard does not do that. Sablezard is not as good right now in the format. Turbo, I think, is a better deck right now. I think Turbo's a C tier deck. I do like the deck a lot. I think it does actually have a lot going for it, but it feels like it's in the same conundrum as Ancient Box, where you have a bit of a fragile engine in your deck. You can fold to Dusknoir, you can fold to Greninja Cologne plays from like Palkia and Goldengo and stuff like that. Dusknoir is annoying for the deck. You can lose your Greninja and Comfeys very easily. You do have a lot of good Pokemon to choose from. Like, I think Iron Hand / Thorn / Raikou is a really good assortment of Pokemon to, you know, want to play within the deck because they're all very good right now. Lightning Pokemon are very popular picks right now to play just because of the big Lightning Weak Pokemon like Palkia and Lugia right now, and Pidgeot. Turbo's really good. The other thing I will mention about Turbo, and genuinely, I don't know, man, I would want to call it C tier, or B tier, but I think one thing Turbo does have going for it is it's another deck in the format that gets to play Greninja and can use Greninja on the second turn of the game. Like, if you go first with Turbo Lost Box, as long as you find Colress or like Pokestop, you're probably getting turn 2 Greninja. And any deck that can use Greninja right now, I think, is a very strong deck. And that's why Palkia is so good, why Goldengo is pretty good. So that's why I think Lost Box is a C tier deck. It gets to use Greninja, which is good. And it also gets to use Sableye, which is also pretty good. I mean, sometimes you can get turn 2 Sableye. Sableye is a really good card. Nobody's playing Jirachi. Sableye is really good right now against, like, Duskulls and stuff. So, I think Turbo has so much going for it. It is held back by one thing, though, and that is, of course, Dragapult and Regidrago. Dragapult is less bad. I think Dragapult is more winnable. Like, if I'm playing against a deck using Dragapult with Turbo Lost Box, I would rather see my opponent play Dreepy over Regidrago, obviously, right? Because you can at least Sableye and Greninja the Dracloaks and Dreepies before they evolve. So that's a good thing. Regidrago is like a bad matchup. Like, you can play Manaphy. Some Drago lists are starting to cut Canceling Clone, though I think they're going to start going back in the deck now, to be honest with you. If I'm playing Drago this weekend, I'm going to at least be playing one copy of Clone in my deck, especially because Thorns is more popular. Yeah, Turbo Lost Box is cool. Its main ops are going to be Regidrago, Dragapult. If you can dodge Regidrago specifically, I can see Lost Box doing good. I want to call it B tier because I actually truly think the deck is that good right now. But in reality, it's not going to be very popular. Nobody's probably really thinking about the deck as much as they want to. So I'm going to call it C tier, but I really think this deck is an under, like, a dark horse of the format that I think is legit actually pretty good. I'm going to put it at the top of C tier. Next up is Miraidon. Honestly, B tier. I think Miraidon's pretty good right now. It's got a good Lugia and Palkia matchup. Okay, Palkia's... I mean, the way you beat Palkia is you take the first two prizes, and they can't beat you. But, yeah, Palkia's pretty solid. I know they have Greninja EX, but like I said, if you can go Amp into, like, Raikou, you're probably winning the game. So, I would say Miraidon is not a bad deck right now, and it's got a good Lugia matchup, and I expect Lugia to be popular in Louisville. So, those are all good things for Miraidon right now. Next up are Arc piles. Arc Duster is probably the best way to play Arc right now, but it's just like D tier for sure. Maybe one deck will make day 2. That's my opinion. There's a few Arc decks that make day 2 at Dortmund, but nothing too crazy. The Cornerstone Noivern deck, I also think is D tier. I think the deck is just kind of dead right now. I think you have a bad matchup into Palkia, you have a bad Dragapult matchup, and you have a bad Lugia matchup. You're losing to like all 3 decks in A tier. It's just not worth playing the deck right now, in my opinion. It was only good in the meta with like Zard and Drago playing really popular. That's just my take on it. I don't think Cornerstone Noivern is all that good. Definitely D tier. Palkia Noctowl. Probably still B tier. Like I said, it gets to use Raining Greninja. It can use Cologne Prime Catcher fairly easily. You get one-shot potential with Palkia. My problem with this deck, though, is I literally just think Palkia Dusknoir is just a better deck. Like, yeah. It's the same thing with Goldango. It's like, Goldango and Palkia Noctowl are really strong decks, but, like, Palkia Dusknoir is just clearly the better way to play Palkia. You know what I mean? That's my issue with the 2 other Palkia decks in the format. And it's like, they're good at using Greninja, but, like, so is Lost Box. But, like, Lost Box, I don't know, it's weird. It's hard to explain. But, yeah, like I said, Palkia Noctowl is a worse Palkia Dusknoir. I'd rather play Palkia Dusknoir over Palkia Noctowl. Palkia Noctowl is still a good deck. I would still maybe put it in B tier for, like, being solid. It's a solid play. Next up is Control, also B tier. Control's fine, though with Lugia being really popular for this tournament and, like, Dragapult and Palkia, those are, like, 3 matchups that Control kind of struggles against, in my opinion, but the thing with Control, though, is it's not a deck that, like, random people play. Like, most of the time, good players will play Control who actually know how to play the deck and probably teched it for the meta. So, like, that's why I can't really call Control, like, C or D tier right now, because it's a deck that legit good players will always play. You're never going to see a new player randomly play Control. That's why I can't put Control any lower than B tier, though I do think it like, at face value, it will struggle into the A tier decks, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. Because, again, the players who play Control usually tend to be, like, very good players who know what they're doing and know how to play each matchup properly, right? So that's why Control is still B tier. Even though it looks pretty bad into the biggest decks in the meta right now. Raging Bolt. I think Raging Bolt is also A tier. I mean, hot take here, Bolt seems insane for this tournament. One of the main things Bolt has going for it going into Louisville is we are in a go-first format. All 3 decks in A tier want to go first. Charizard, Drago, they want to go first. Every deck wants to go first except for, like, Miraidon, Moon. Like, literally the only decks are just the big basic decks. And that's why I think Raging Bolt is an A-tier deck right now. It can take advantage of the format. Everyone's choosing to go first. Raging Bolt likes to go second, and that's big. Raging Bolt is a good deck right now. Now, I'm not saying it's the best deck in the format. It's nowhere near the best deck. I think it's legit A-tier for this tournament because of how strong the meta is for a deck that wants to go second, but also Raging Bolt is very autopilot-y, very easy to, it's very straightforward, and it's very easy to counter, and it's very hard to counterplay with it. That's the problem with Raging Bolt, is that all these, like, big decks, like Palkia, Lugia, Dragapult, Raging Bolt, in theory, is good against them, but Raging Bolt does not have a lot of agency over a lot of its turns. It's literally just Sada, Catcher, maybe flip heads, maybe flip tails. That's about it. You don't really do a whole lot with the deck that's special. There's not a lot of counterplay you get to make a Raging Bolt. That's the problem with it, and that's why Raging Bolt is never going to be the best deck, but I do think it is legit A tier. It feels like the best turbo deck just because it farms decks that want to go first. Same thing with, like, Miraidon, right? Next up, we have Snorlax. Stall's B tier, like Pidgeot Control. Stall's B tier, for sure. Stall's pretty good. I don't know if Stall's better than Control. Actually, yeah, Stall is probably better than Control right now, to be honest with you. I'd probably put Snorlax and Pidgeot, like, in this ranking order. Next up is Turbo Moon. B tier. Just another turbo deck that goes kaboom and goes burr. I think this is kind of how the meta is right now. It just feels like there's a lot of solid decks that are in the B tier, and then there's, like, the clear, like, best maybe most popular decks in the room in the A tier. And that's kind of where Moon stands. It's a B tier deck. It's a turbo deck, much like Raging Bolt. It has a little bit more agency over Bolt, but it's still the same thing where it's like you're just going fast, going kaboom, taking big knockouts, and cheesing opponents out of games. So that's Turbo Moon basically in a nutshell. Though it is a little bit weaker to like Dusknoir and Radiant Greninja and stuff, because you are self-inflicting damage with Frenzy Gouging if you're going down that route. Next up is Terapagos, another A tier deck. So this is what I meant by there's two decks that I think could be in S tier. If theoretically, if I had to put a deck in S tier, it would be either Lugia or Terapagos. I don't think there's an S tier deck right now, but I think Lugia and Terapagos are both A tier. Those are the two top decks in the format. In my opinion, the two best decks right now are Lugia V-Star, Terapagos EX Dusknoir. They're both A tier decks. Those are the only two decks I would consider putting in S tier, though I don't think there's any S tier deck right now. That's where I'm putting it in the meta. Terapagos Dusknoir is very popular right now. Tord got top A with it. Everybody's playing with the deck right now. It is definitely going to be a potential like top 3 deck in Louisville in terms of popularity. This is a deck you probably want to practice against if you haven't already, because I do think you probably want to get reps in against Terapagos Dusknoir, because like I said, this deck is going to be popular in Louisville, and it's getting a lot of hype right now. It's getting a lot of hype. I thought its hype for Dortmund was kind of insane, but I think post-Dortmund, its hype is even bigger. And it's getting gassed up out the wazoo. So expect to see a lot of Terapagos in Louisville. Expect to beat this deck. If you're somebody who's going to make it far in the tournament, you're going to hit Terapagos Dusknoir, especially because you saw that Dortmund conversion rate, where Terapagos Dusknoir was like the most played deck in day 2 of Dortmund. So expect to hit this deck if you're going far in the tournament. I'm assuming everyone watching and going to Louisville wants to go far in the tournament, so expect to see this deck. All right, next up is POW, C tier, and Future Hands D tier. POW is a worse Palkia, and a worse Goldengo, in my opinion, because you're a little bit more fragile. Your deck kind of loses harder to Dusknoir than Goldengo. It's not a terrible deck, though. And again, in a go-first meta, going first with Shenpao is good, but going second in this meta, it feels a lot worse. And then Future Hands, I think, is just not a very good deck right now. It's not the worst deck, but it's just kind of a pile, and it's a pile that probably isn't worth playing over Miraidon. Miraidon is a better Future Hands deck, is basically my take on that. But there you go, folks. That is my tier list ranking for the meta heading into the Louisville Regional Championships. Let me know what you think of my tier list. Again, I don't think there's an S tier deck, but if I had to say the best decks in the format, it would be either Lugia or Terapagos EX. I think the most played decks are going to be Lugia, Terapagos, and probably Charizard, and maybe close behind it, Raging Bolt. Or Raging Bolt would probably be 4th most played. I'll give my opinions on all that in a future video, obviously. But there you go. That's my tier list ranking for Louisville. A tier, these are the best decks in the format right now. B tier are all solid plays, but I don't think they're going to be as popular as the other decks in A tier, and I don't think they're as good, but they have a lot of things going for them. C tier are fringe decks that I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 made day 2, but outside of that, I don't think they're going to be very popular or worth playing. D tier are just like, maybe 1 might make day 2, but I would not be surprised if none of the decks in D tier made day 2. But there you go, folks. That's my tier list. I'll leave a link to it down below if you want to go try it out. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe down below too. We're on the road to 18K subs and all that good stuff. Yeah, have a good day. Bye-bye.